Now we have one more speaker, Christy Wilkins. Okay, you're shown in opposition. Okay, thank you. Now, I believe that's all the speakers that are signed up. And that being the case, I'll recognize Councilmember Morrison.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank everybody for their comments. I think that what the comments have made clear is that we as a community have not finished this conversation, and it needs to be a broad and inclusive conversation. I think the council needs to hear that conversation and understand all the concerns. That would be the best way to serve the city for sure. I don't see any urgency in getting this fusion center up and running. And I have to say that I've been frustrated over the past months as a new council member of getting into places where I don't feel like we've fully vetted the community conversation about particular issues and where we're going with various new technology items and all. So I believe that that it really would make sense to have this community conversation before we move forward. I think that it'll be a more effective conversation if we don't have one foot down that path. I think that it could very well be, we can get all the items on the table. If there are ways to ensure that we all understand what private sector versus open source versus all of that means, what this community can be comfortable with, what the council as policymakers are comfortable with, and make sure we're in the position of making those decisions. So with that, I would like to withdraw my motion and change it to a motion to postpone this item with a request that we work with the community and the staff to have that conversation as expeditiously as possible. So my motion is to postpone.
Motion to postpone by Councilmember Morrison. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Spellman for purposes of discussion.
I'd like to ask a few questions of Chief Acevedo, if I could. Chief, this is on our agenda because we're accepting a federal grant from Homeland Security. Is that correct?
Yes, we've already accepted that grant. This is actually to expend part of the funding of that grant.
What's the rest of the grant for?
It is for the UASI designation that includes a big part of it's really for the establishment of our center. Some of it is being used for emergency planning and supplies, but this part is the $200,000 to actually do the build out at the facility at the DPS.
So there's $200,000 just for construction of a facility, which would be the housing of the Fusion Center, not for activities that would take place inside that building.
Correct.
When you accept that grant, a lot of discussions happened here in the last few minutes about the federal guidelines for fusion centers. You're aware of the federal guidelines, and did anything surprise you in the public hearing we just heard?
Well, actually, no. I'm glad that you made the motion for this discussion, because I think there's a couple of things I'd like to address. One, we are well aware, and this is why it's good not to be first sometimes when these kinds of things come out, of the mistakes of the other fusion centers that have been made. Quite frankly, I share in the concerns. We are not going to make those same mistakes, because that's not the business we're in. Secondly, I think it's really important for the council and the community to know that the data that we're going to be getting or sharing is only criminal predicate, is criminal information that the agencies already have access to. The only difference is that the participating agency at the local level, it'll be an automated process where we'll be able to connect some of the dots and analyze the investigative data, which is something we can do now, but it takes phone calls and takes more time.
Well, so the advantage from your point of view of having the Fusion Center is that you've got a space where you can share information that you've already got that you can already share.
Absolutely.
Okay. And is this paying for any of the salaries, staff time on your part or the other partner agencies' part?
It provides, we're going to be using the funding for one of the analysts, and we'll be using current resources.
Okay, so there's a little bit of money to pay for some analysis time.
Yes.
Okay. When you accept a grant like this, Are those DOJ guidelines, which have been discussed by other people in this public hearing, are those binding on this fusion center?
No, we can make it as restrictive as we want, and we're not interested in the private sector data. All we're going to be doing is it's basically sharing our RMS systems on our arrest reports, and only when you have specific actionable information. And if I could give an example of how this would work, we have a drive-by shooting in Austin, Texas, and all we have is a blue Ford Buick Chevy Monte Carlo, two-door with a black top. And in order for us to find out if that vehicle or one that matched that description has been involved in a crime in an adjacent area, we have to make phone calls. What this would happen is, let's say hypothetically after that drive-by, that driver gets arrested for reckless driving in Georgetown 10 minutes after they've been involved in a drive-by here, it would give us a clue as to a potential suspect and something we'd be interested in. And that gives us the opportunity to actually connect those dots to try to solve crimes without having to do the phone calls, which really slows down the process.
That means that you also have immediate access to the crime reports, the arrest reports of Travis County, Pflugerville, Round Rock, other agencies.
Yes, sir. It's nothing new. It's what we have now. The other commitment that I would make, and I think that we would, and you're all part of the committee, the mayor is, we would never expand anything without the knowledge, complete knowledge of the community, and without discussion by the community. What we are proposing is really sharing information that's already available, but this gives us the opportunity to do it more in a quicker fashion and gives us the opportunity to actually analyze the information and see if we can solve crimes.
Let me see if I can put a boundary on this criminal predicate stuff.
Yeah.
Crime and arrest reports clearly are inside the boundary.
Yes.
How about field interrogations and traffic stops?
We don't have plans for doing that now. However, that's something we may consider in the future, but if we did consider that, we would bring it to everybody's attention. Because again, going back to that example that I just shared with you, which is that Monte Carlo, let's change the hypothetical where those folks get stopped for reckless driving, but the officer, instead of citing the person, decides to FI the vehicle or give them what we do here is what's called a written warning. We would lose a potential lead on a crime. So it would be, we may ask for that, but that would be as far as we would go, and I would only do that with the full knowledge of the council and the community and the discussion before we expand anything of that side.
Okay, now, so your current plans are stuff which is clearly inside the boundary, so things like field interrogations, which are in a gray area.
Correct.
But would be useful from a tactical point of view, at least some of the time, are not currently in your plans, and before you would include them, how will we know whether or not you're going to talk about including field interrogations, for example?
I couldn't hear that.
How would we know? How would the people in this room know that the Fusion Center was considering putting field interrogation databases in the Fusion Center?
Well, the MOU that we're signing would not have that on there. We wouldn't have the authority to do that.
So we have a memorandum of understanding which is going to include in it the policies of the Fusion Center and the kind of data that the participants will be using and not using.
Correct. And the member agencies would have to agree to be to adhere to that set of standards.
Everybody would have to agree to the same standards.
Yes.
So Round Rock says, we got this great FI database, we'd like to include it, and the rest of you guys would not be able to include it because it's not in the memorandum of understanding.
Yes.
Correct. But again, if they have an FI system, that we may just call them and ask, "Hey, do you guys have an FI card on this that we're looking for?"
Yeah, you can still make the phone call that you could always have made.
Yes.
If there are changes made in that memorandum of understanding, what's the procedure for making those changes?
It would have to go through the working group, and our commitment here, because we do have our Public Safety Commission, is we would discuss it with them as well.
Okay, so the commission would know about it, the working group would know about it. Would this be a publicly available document? Would it be posted on the city's website, for example, or some other public place?
The actual policy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.